Court's in recess.
Anything you can tell us, or is anyone, your boss coming in?
Did Wendy send Scott to find him?
Yes, I did, Jared. Got it.
Okay, what?
Got it.
I don't know where the mother and the father and stuff. They put me to a lot of trouble
That's the material I'd like to hand out of people that are particularly helpful to our office. I hope you guys, I don't know if I have enough here, but if you'll share them. Okay, Rob, we're ready.
One of these two. Ready to go? Good. Naturally, we're very pleased with the verdicts. I certainly want to commend the jury for a splendid job. They were patient. It took 3 weeks. It was a difficult and challenging case. I think they carefully sifted through the evidence, and I'm very pleased with the verdicts. There are several people that I want to thank. First of all, of course, I wish to thank our doctors, Dr. Fosdell and Dr. Dietz. We also had extensive conferences with Dr. Philip Resnick of Cleveland, who was also very helpful. I'd like to thank my team members that work with me, particularly Carol White and Greg O'Mara, and another Assistant District Attorney, John Redden, who assisted in the, John Genrick, who assisted in some of the research questions on short notice. I'd like to thank the rest of my staff as well that worked, my deputies that ran the office. I did nothing with respect to the office other than this case. I'd like to thank a few other people around the country who were very helpful in preparing us for the psychiatric testimony, the cross-examination. Bob Sadie, who's the state's attorney in New London, Connecticut. Steve Sellers, who's an assistant state's attorney in Wallingford, Connecticut. Teresa Whalen, an assistant state's attorney in Rockville, Maryland. Kathy Hill, an assistant state's attorney in Westminster, Maryland. Bob Egan, an assistant state's attorney in Cook County, Chicago, Illinois. Bill Kunkel, attorney who prosecuted the Gacy case of Chicago, was very helpful to us. Sharon May, an assistant state's attorney in Baltimore, Maryland. And Ken Lance Lanning and Robert Hazelwood of the FBI, Quantico, Virginia, all of whom were very helpful. I want to thank additionally the members of my staff who were so helpful, my good wife and family who put up with my absences over the holidays. Any questions?
How surprised were you at the verdict?
I was very pleased with the verdicts. I think it was a very well-tried case. Mr. Boyle's argument yesterday was one of the most persuasive I've ever seen, and I've been watching courts for a long time, including on my honeymoon, where my wife had to drag me out of a court in the Bahamas. So I love to watch court proceedings, and I thought it was a very excellent argument, and I waited with trepidation, and I'm very pleased with the verdicts. I think the evidence was there. I'm very pleased that the jury saw it that way.
Two dissenters, what do you make of that, Mike?
Well, it meant that they carefully sifted the evidence, and they're certainly their right. The requirement for the civil verdict is 5/6, and I'm very pleased with the verdict that came through.
Was it more than you had hoped for to get sanity, no mental disease on all the counts?
Well, you have your fondest hope, and this met my fondest hope. But like the defense, we were. This is a case where you check it out and you talk to the psychiatrists and you talk to witnesses. This was an unusual individual, and I think the jury saw through it, that as Dr. Dietz said, and he apparently was very persuasive, and Dr. Palermo was very persuasive, I think, on that particular issue. And this type of disease, basically, yes, it gives you a sexual urge. But you can understand, I want to speak forcefully to this, the problem if this type of a defense was accepted around the country. You have it on rape. Dr. Berlin has tried it with some rape cases. And where we were very helped, particularly out. Teresa Whalen confronted that defense twice in Maryland with, I think it was called the Route 29 rapist. And what you're saying, if you saw also Dr. Friedman spoke of his concern that some of his colleagues were diminishing the concept of personal responsibility. I don't know if you caught that, but I think he was speaking to his concern, because if this type of a defense would be a viable defense, we're going to see, a person's always complained about loopholes and so on. I'm not saying this is a loophole, but you understand, I suspect there are tragically other people around the country that have this malady that don't act it out. And if anything comes out of these proceedings, goodness sake, a person troubled with one of these paraphilias, whatever it might be, voyeurism, exhibitionism, necrophilia, whatever it is, it's time to get help. Go and get help. You're not alone. There are people that want to help you. And this is certainly an opportunity to do it. I think also it shows the vice of pornography, in my opinion, unquestionably, the feeding and the fueling of these interests. Mr. Boyle has spoken forcefully to that the other day at this proceeding. So I think there's much that we can learn from this, and that is also fantasies. I've examined my own fantasies. And you wonder, I remember one time I was at a gathering where a man spoke about his fantasies destroying his marriage, fantasizing about this or that, and not realizing the tremendous blessings with which he was blessed. And all of us can fantasize and invite unhappiness and trouble. I think it's a good lesson on how well served people are by controlling their fantasies. I've seen it in murder cases where a guy, something has gone a regular run-of-the-mill murder case where a person wrongs one another and they start feeding on it, they talk against the object of their hate, then they damage the property of that man, then they assault that man, and finally they kill that man. It's the fantasizing the next step. I ought to smash his property. I ought to kill him for what he did. The danger of any type of fantasy, and I think it's highlighted by this case.
Mr. McCann, you have probably answered this question privately 1,000 times. I apologize for the repetition. I'll ask you again. So many people, even those with a passing knowledge of what happened in this case, and even those who have followed the trial, said under the letter of the law, McCann did a good job of proving that Jeffrey Dahmer is not insane. But boy, based on the things he did, he is crazy, he is nuts, he is a sick human being. What is your response to that kind of comment?
Well, Dr. Palermo said it right on the witness stand that this is a sick man. The insanity is, of course, a term of art, and it applies. It doesn't apply to what, because as I've said to the jury when I've voir dired them, I said, look, I've seen people go up the street 80 miles an hour and said that man's crazy. That's not what we mean by insanity. And the jury, I think, understood that. Of course, this man needs help. No one is saying otherwise. I know that I know that that will be extended to him certainly at the prison. But there was, and I know Mr. Boyle is concerned about that. The real tragedy here is, I believe he could have stopped at any stage. I believe that. I don't believe he was a rolling train. I think he was the engineer of a rolling train. And it was, in my opinion, this man could have stopped doing what he did. He decided to go ahead with it, as anybody can decide to execute a desire to act out a sexual fantasy. This man decided to do it, and it involved taking a human being's life. And
You talked about some of the positive aspects of this trial. What are some of the negative aspects for this trial and all the publicity it's
the
received?
negative aspects, I said from day one. I'm very concerned about people emulating the drugging that was involved, and I'm very concerned about anybody deciding they're going to witness the notoriety that attends upon this type of thing and copycat it. And that's a responsibility that you folks have as members of the press.
Do you think there might be a copycat?
I'm not going to even speak to that. I pray there isn't.
Have you been unhappy with all the press coverage, or do you understand it?
Oh, my wife was a journal reporter for years. Of course, I understand it, and I understand why you're here. But you can understand my feeling. Dr. Dietz mentioned it early on, said to me, Mike, we've got to do something. We don't want that drug voiced around. Mr. Boyle agreed immediately, and we've done our very best to consider that situation, but I would hope there will be no one that would copy it.
What about the city of Milwaukee's image? I noticed that you weren't calling Ambrosia Chocolate by its proper name in court. What kind of decision was that?
Well, it was, I love this city unabashedly, and the people that come here know why, because it's a very special place to live. I could live anywhere in this county, but I live in the city of Milwaukee because I love this city. And it's a special place, and it's a wonderful place to live and to do business and to raise a family. I lived as a student in Detroit, Washington, D.C., and Boston. They were interesting, stimulating cities in different ways, but I came back to Milwaukee because I love it. It's a wonderful place to be. And, of course, for someone to say, look at this happened in Milwaukee, this could happen anywhere in the country. And it's a happenstance that he settled himself here. But believe me, this is a very special place to live.
You say he is sick, and you say he needs treatment.
Yeah.
Those both sounds like things for a person who belongs in a hospital.
No, it's a
Isn't
person that
the
needs
best
a,
place
no,
for
he
him
needs,
to
he
be?
needs some psychiatric help. But this is not he's not psychotic. He is definitely not psychotic. He's not out of touch with reality. He has no delusions. He has no hallucinations. The biggest decision for him, without which there can be no treatment, is a decision to get it. He was exposed to Dr. Rosen for 3/4 of a year and refused treatment after the indecent exposure case. Nothing will happen to this man until he decides that he wants to change the content of his fantasies. I've discussed that with doctors. You don't need to be in a hospital to do that. That can be done in a prison facility, and he'll need advice to do that. But the number one issue is he has got to decide to do that.
Do you think this
sets a strong legal precedent so that other sexual deviants, child molesters won't be trying to use the insanity defense?
I know I talked with the persons that were concerned about it being used in other cases. This is the first time I know of it being used in a murder case. I'm very concerned about it and had received cooperation from these district attorneys that I mentioned, particularly Assistant District Attorney Teresa Whalen from Rockville, Maryland, and Assistant District Attorney Kathy Hill from Westminster, Maryland. They were extremely cooperative. They're concerned as well about this type of paraphilic defense, whether it's a child molester or whatever it is, a rapist, a child molester, and we talked extensively about it and secured transcripts of cases involving it, preparing. And I don't question either the integrity or the commitment of Dr. Berlin, but I very much disagree with it, with his posture on this issue. Very much disagree with it.
Thank you very much.
I want to say one additional thing. As someone I understand took of umbrage that Mr. Boyle and I evidenced respect for each other at the close of this case. We've been friends since we were assistant district attorneys together. We have vigorously contested a number of times. Believe me, as you know, as you deal with your competing newspaper, doesn't mean people can't be civil or even have an affection for each other and still go out and fight like cats in a tough dispute. This has been with a lot of civility, but very vigorously contested.
You concur, Jerry?
I concur, absolutely.
Mike McCann, before you leave, while I have you both